Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to the January meeting of the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board. If you require ASL interpretation or if that's helpful to you, please pin Marcus S. to your screen to follow along. We will begin by taking roll. Lena Andrews.
Here.
Oliver Beasley. Dr. Jamil Bey.
Here.
Joanna Deming.
Here.
No, thank you. Knowledge Build Hudson.
Peace and good morning. I'm here.
Jerome Jackson is out sick today. Council President Teresa Kale Smith. Mark Masterson.
Here.
James Myers. Marcus Reed.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Paul Bradley. Sonia Tillman. Derek Tillman.
Here.
Dr. Diamante Walker.
Here.
Adrienne Wonaha.
Present.
I am here. And Megan Winters.
Here.
And I'd like to extend a special welcome to Marcus Reed, who is a new appointee. This is his first meeting. He is our tenant representative. Welcome, Marcus, to the advisory board.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. We will next move on to the review of our minutes, which were distributed to everyone. Has everybody had an opportunity to read and review the minutes? Do we have a motion on the floor for the minutes?
Motion to accept.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I'll abstain. I wasn't attending.
Yeah, I'll
Thank
abstain
you.
too. I wasn't there.
Okay. That was Lena and I believe Joanna for the minutes. Okay, the motion carries. We will move on to, we do not have any registered public commenters today. So we will continue to move forward through our agenda with community discussions. First is a presentation by Megan Confer-Hammond, Executive Director of the Fair Housing Partnership.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I don't have a lot of time, so I will not belabor data points, but I will simply go through an overview of what has happened in fair housing in 2021. To understand as I go through this is that the categories are largely related to federal administrative guidance and rules that has led to municipal policy. And then for case resolutions, to understand that administrative complaints are governed and investigated by HUD or state or local commissions, as well as you can also take housing discrimination claims into litigation. So these are only case resolutions, not cases that have ongoing statuses, of which there are many. And so you can understand is that 2021 was quite the year. And so we hope to hit the ground running in 22 to build off of a rebuilding year, if you will, on the establishment of the state of fair housing nationwide and what we hope to accomplish in Western Pennsylvania. So to move through what came down from the federal government in 2021, you may be aware. And so HUD announced last February that the definition of sex federally includes sexual orientation and gender identity. And so administrative complaints at HUD or in municipalities outside of the city. But also, this is important to the city as well because it provides the city commission with federal jurisdiction and authority when it investigates sexual orientation and gender identity cases at the city level. And so this case came out of the decision from the Supreme Court Boston, Clayton County, which was related to employment. To look into disparate impact is to change the slide, please. To understand disparate impact is to understand that impact is a legal theory that governs discrimination when it's based on a rule that disproportionately has an impact on a protected group of people. And so what happens with that is that in December of 2020, in the last federal administration, a new disparate impact rule was implemented that succeeded the 2013 rule. This means that on the administrative level at the city commission or at HUD, we have great difficulty, if any capacity, to bring disparate impact cases forward. So in June 2021, HUD announced that they will be restoring the rule, but until the rule is actually restored, our capacity and ability to do disparate impact cases outside of litigation is quite constrained. If you can move to the next slide. And so to go into, sorry, so my own slides have gotten confused. So I skipped past it. You can go 2 slides back. So we're discussing impact. To discuss affirmatively furthering fair housing briefly until we get into municipal policy related to it, is that in June, HUD also restored the affirmatively furthering fair housing requirement. Now, what's really interesting about what happened in June is that HUD restored the previous AFFH rule, but it did not restore compliance. And so how municipalities do compliance of AFFH is an ongoing discussion that HUD has had listening sessions on, and additional rulemaking is expected, but has not happened. And so what I want to underscore with AFFH as we get into what has happened nationwide is that the AFFH regulation is built into the Fair Housing Act of 1968. It was created over 50 years ago, but AFFH requires federal implementation. And we have seen a lot of seesawing, and it's taken us over 50 years simply to get an AFFH rule from HUD. And as we can see at the federal level, the compliance requirements have seesawed wildly over the last decade. And so what we've seen in 2021 was that if you go to the slide, please go to the slide for AFFH in Boston, is that Boston, Massachusetts passed local legislation related to AFFH and local compliance. And so municipalities can pass local legislation, can have decision-making about the implementation of AFFH locally. And what Boston has done is they have created a requirement that when residential projects are submitted, that an AFFH assessment is also submitted. And this assessment does a lot of what we talked about in the past, which looks at whether it will cause displacement of the protected classes, what kind of new housing opportunities it will provide, how it addresses that area's history of exclusion, and it also includes an accessibility checklist that goes a bit above what the federal requirements are, which are minimal. And so I raise this to say, I understand this body is not about passing citywide legislation, but I had a moment with the developer in 2021 who asked me, how can we expect to comply with AFFH? How do you answer questions when we have seen such dramatic changes from year to year or administration to administration? And so what I want to say is that bodies such as this one can look at what we discussed in the past about creating guidelines, not to pass or fail proposals, because I understand how proposals get here, but to add to our knowledge base about what the impact of our developed affordable housing is doing to our community in order to guide our decision-making for, say, how to prioritize funding, for what is necessary if we're providing X but not Y with our residential proposals. And so the Boston example provides a framework in which to create that assessment in order to give us a knowledge on what value and harm that our proposals can do and how that can inform our decision-making or desires in the future for what we want our housing to address. And so also is that FHP will be meeting with municipalities throughout Western Pennsylvania in 22 to discuss both municipal fair housing compliance, and in response to that developer's question is whether that municipality has AFFH within the spirit of its everyday activities, and whether or not such efforts can be made in any municipality, and looking at making sure that housing assessments are looking at the history of exclusion and a fair housing lens when residential proposals are being considered, and then approved, or in some cases not approved. And this is an issue we're seeing across Pennsylvania, in which I expect to have updates in 22 about actions addressing that, in which we are seeing outside of the city denial of residential proposals for affordable housing. And we are also seeing within the city, for example, once we are able to approve those projects, concerns about how do we make sure that we're addressing equity and building affordable housing in an equitable way. And it's complicated, I understand that. And so this framework is a wonderful way to have a concrete, tangible way to dig into those details in order to work this through on a day-to-day level. And so going into case resolutions that we've seen so I did this for impact, my apologies, and you skip over down to appraisals. To cover appraisals, you understand is that it has been widely covered in the news. In the news, there have been multiple stories of Black homeowners who have gotten properties wildly underappraised because of their home featuring their identity of who they are. And so in March of 2021, HUD had a $50,000 settlement with JP Morgan Chase Bank regarding an appraisal, and recognized that the complaint continues against the actual appraisal company. The JP Morgan Chase Bank conciliation is based on the bank contract with the appraisal company and using that appraisal in the determination of the mortgage product for that homeowner. And so HUD is deeply invested in addressing appraisals. And so HUD and the federal government has created the Interagency Task Force on Property Appraisal and Value Equity. That was created in June. It expects to move full force forward in 22. And essentially what we're seeing right now is the reimagining of how we calculate property value. What do we do in the calculation of property value so that we stop devaluing Black-owned homes or homes in areas in which there's a Black majority population? And so we're seeing a lot happening around the concept of what property value is and how it's calculated, the racism within it, and how it will be addressed at a federal level with recommendations coming as soon as possible, with proposals expected this year. And to cover Pennsylvania, I am proud that in Eastern Pennsylvania, a partner Fair Housing Initiative program, the Housing Equality Center of Pennsylvania that serves the outside of Philadelphia, they resolved a six-figure case on disability based on reasonable accommodations. And that settlement occurred last March with 19 apartment complexes that were governed by that housing provider in Eastern Pennsylvania. And then to move towards more locally, FHP in September of 2021, we won on a motion to dismiss on all counts in federal litigation. And this included impact, where the argument was on behalf of a survivor of domestic violence who was fleeing her unit because her abuser continued to stalk her at the unit after she had obtained the PFA. The housing provider, who was a private landlord in the Glenshaw area, was refusing to release her from her lease. And so she was facing thousands of dollars in unpaid rent for future tenancy, not her current tenancy, or potential violence committed against her by her abuser. And so after we won the motion to dismiss, we then moved forward into conciliation, in which I am proud that she was able to receive almost $12,500 before the holiday season. And I bring this case up also because we implemented a lease clause in which a private landlord will allow survivors of domestic violence to terminate their lease to flee abuse. And so FHP is working with the City Commission on Human Relations about implementing such a requirement or propagating such a requirement to private landlords within the city of Pittsburgh where domestic violence is an explicit protected class, in order to prevent survivors from having to choose between physical violence perpetuated against them or death. And so we hope to have this change in the city of Pittsburgh moving forward in 22 to protect survivors, as we have seen with COVID, has arguably worsened domestic violence in terms of quarantine and isolation and having to be homebound. And then simply to go over and to share, as everyone may be aware, unfortunately in October 2021, the city of Pittsburgh struck down the city's source of income ordinance. The Home Rule Charter, the Supreme Court ruled in the state, was not triggered. The exception to the Home Rule Charter was not triggered by the second-class city law or the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. I bring this up to underscore is that I'm sure as everyone has experienced, a lot of the affordable housing conversation happening both nationwide and locally is about making vouchers more available, because we all know we can't simply build our way out of the housing crisis. There are other legal theories in which to move forward an ordinance in the future, if such is possible. And so simply to underscore is that the loss of that ordinance and the need for addressing the housing crisis with propagating and getting vouchers out amongst the city, which we know is a difficulty, is also a priority amongst nationwide and locally in order to get the most vulnerable into housing. And so I will simply share is that I know 2021 has been and was an incredibly rough and difficult year full of changes. And I hope to be able to move forward working on the tangible acts that we can get done of defining and understanding what the fair housing impact of our affordable housing is, and what it is we need to know and understand in order to evaluate what we need to build and what we want to prioritize to build in order to address historical exclusion and segregation and to address what we know to be difficulties in our city, including disability accessibility. So with that, I thank you all for your time. I hope I haven't gone over, and I wish everyone a very good luck in this new year.
Thank you, Megan. That was very informative. Can you send a copy to your RA staff so that everybody can review it? It's a lot of information. We want to make sure that you have an opportunity to digest it, if you can. So thank you. We have one more presentation. Up next is Erin Sukenik, excuse me. Hopefully I did not butcher her name, who's the Executive Director of the Hilltop Alliance.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm also going to loop in Jeff Martin and Mohawk Chuan, who are also on our team. So, and Vathina, are you? Yeah, you're running the PowerPoint?
Yep, just let me know.
Perfect. All right. So yes, as Kelly mentioned there, my name is Erin Sukenik. I'm the Executive Director of the Hilltop Alliance. And with me today is Jeff Martin, our Services Manager, and Mohawk Chuan, who's our Construction and Redevelopment Manager. So we were a part of the early HAP Administrator Awards in spring of 2019. So this was, following the
Erin?
announcement. Yep.
You're coming off, it's a little difficult to hear you. It's coming off a little robotic on my end.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, we responded to the original homeowner assistance program, RFP, when that program was announced initially in spring of 2019. And then we received our first project in August of 2019. And since then, Bettina, if you can jump to the next slide. These are some pie charts that represent what we've completed to date. So we have assisted 73 homeowners in South Pittsburgh, in the neighborhoods that you see around the pie chart there, to complete and submit applications to you guys at the URA and HOF. And then of those 73, 29 have been approved. And this pie chart here shows you, where those are. You can see high concentrations in Carrick and Beltshoover. And then Athena, if you could jump to the next one. We currently have 1 under construction and 25 completed to date. This just shows you here also high concentration. The difference between the completed and under construction ones are ones that have been approved but have not yet closed, with the administrative staff there. Athena, if you can jump to the next, this will just give you a visual representation of where those projects are scattered throughout our South Pittsburgh Hilltop service area. You can see high concentration in the western neighborhoods of the Hilltop, some in the eastern, and then also throughout Carrick. Carrick is a pretty large geography. It's about 1/5 of the city's population. Or I'm sorry, it's the 5th largest neighborhood in the city. Next, one reason why we love doing the homeowner assistance program, which, just to remind everyone, is up to $30,000 in home repairs for homeowners who are at or below 80% area median income, is because we also have other programs that vertically work very well with our role as an administrator. So one of these is the Emergency Stabilization Grant program. So this is a program that we have internally that is completely funded through philanthropic, corporate, and other sources, that is up to $5,000 in a number of neighborhoods throughout our service area. And they typically address emergency issues that need triage. So things like roof repair, gutter, downspout, electrical, anything that, threatens water or fire, is going to be of the highest priority. So with this program, if someone is waiting for a HAP award or denied a HAP award, we can then, utilize this to still provide support to them. Next slide, please. Another of these programs that work real well vertically with our role as a program administrator is our free wills program. So this is a free last will and testament that we provide to any Hilltop homeowner over 50 years old. So we launched this program about 5 years ago, and the reason for it was really because when we started doing research about vacant properties, often we'd find that the name on the deed was someone who had been deceased for many years. Just through a simple Google search, you'd find an obituary. So what that kind of prompted for us was that people weren't thinking through, the next generation of the ownership of their home, and transferring that asset and building community wealth in the process. So what we wanted to do was get people to start thinking about this and do it at no cost. So we also have any HAP clients that have been referred to us, we've also helped get a free will. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand it over to Mohawk, who is our construction manager, to share some case studies through his experience.
Thanks, Aaron, and good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Thanks for having us here today. Doing what we can with what we have. These projects are limited budget projects, but we try to fix all the priorities on these projects. There are these examples, and I would try to be very brief on these. These are fairly straight, very recent projects which we had. The first project which I'm going to talk about is the project at Concordia Street, and this project seemed to be a fairly straightforward project in the starting, with a roof replacement, a vertical line replacement, that is the line which connects the bathroom to the sewer line, and a siding replacement. But as soon as we tore down the existing roof, we realized that the supports were not adequate, and we had to give a go-ahead to the contractor without even getting into change orders and everything because we couldn't leave the roof open. Um, this is not a common scenario, but every project is a unique project in a way. Second, when we opened the vertical stack line for the replacement, the plumbing contractor realized that there was an existing blockage, existing clog in the seaward line. And again, once we found that out, and it wasn't a part of the scope, but we had to take care of that. So we snaked the line. That did not help. And after a combination of camera inspection, water jetting, and the snaking, we finally could make it work. But we realized that there was a bigger problem in the seaward line because most of these lines are old terracotta lines. Um, with this practice, we could solve the problem in hand, but eventually the homeowner would need to get it replaced. But with the camera inspection, we could find out the exact location of the problem, and that would help the homeowner big time in the longer run. Um, long story short, we had to take a couple of immediate actions to remediate the problems, and we had to definitely pay some out of pocket cost for this. But doing that, we could come up with a successful project, and eventually that it was a happy client, and that what matters. Next slide, please. Well, the second project which I'm going to talk about briefly is it's a project at Linview Ave in Carrick. And there was a structural issue. On our walkthrough, we realized that there was a compromised retaining wall in the rear of the property. I mean, I generally prefer to stay away from the structural repairs because these repairs tend to be very, these are not time effective, as well as these take a lot of money out of budget. And but for this project, I teamed up with the URA inspectors, with the city inspectors and the contractors, and we came up with a design with which we could strengthen the existing retaining wall. And that plan was very successful, as you can see in the photographs. That was a false facade wall in front of the existing wall, and we could save a lot of money with these kind of prospects. So that's more like a value engineering thing here. Well, later in the project, we found out that there was a drainage issue in the back, and with these projects, code enforcement and keeping water away from the property is the main intent. So we found out there was a drainage problem, and we had to revise the scope to to fit in this drainage issue, and we had to take out some aesthetic repairs from the original scope. But the homeowner understood that, and again, it was one of the successful projects, HAP projects with us. So these were the few technical challenges which we come across on these projects. Now I'm gonna hand it over to Jeff to take it forward from here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mohawk, and good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year as well. For these case studies 3 and 4, it is about creating game plans based on human conditions. So for the first, we're going to talk about Meredith Street, also in Carrick. The homeowner, who is of limited mobility and is elderly, had an horrible hoarding issue that we had to work around, as well as a limited working hours because of her sleeping schedule. And because of the hoarding issue, there were unsanitary working conditions, which made it difficult for the contractor to complete interior work. But working with the homeowner, we were able to get the interior work done. And then on the exterior, the topography of the property made it difficult to work outside. The home, like many homes in the city, was not only close together to the 2 adjacent homes on the street, but also was on a hill. And so, despite all of those difficulties, we were able to successfully complete the project and have a happy client at the end. Also, on Spring Street in Arlington, we were dealing with a lot of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing issues that ended up taking up a lot of the budget away from the original scope of work, as well as reworking the scope for the accessibility needs of the resident who was also elderly and of limited mobility. And we accomplished that by adding a new accessible laundry room. So even though we face difficulties and challenges when we move forward with these projects, we're still able to work with the contractor and ultimately work with the homeowner on making these projects successful, as well as having a happy homeowner at the end who can confidently stay in their home. So next slide, please. And I will turn it back to Aaron.
So as you've heard from these examples, these are some of the more challenging projects that we've faced, of the almost 30 now. But the reason we chose to highlight them really was because of your policy making and oversight role in the program. So we wanted to share just some lessons that we've learned from some of these harder projects. One being, which, Jeff really, I think, underscored in his case studies there, was that an on-call social worker to work with our HAP clients who have unique needs would be especially helpful. Someone who can help us and the contractors work through issues with the client, that might be related to hoarding or addiction. And, there are a number of other case studies and, that we did not share, that also, face other issues. So just something to consider. Other lessons learned, more along the lines of what Mohawk was mentioning there. We have had, a great working relationship and really appreciate, the partnership with, the administrative staff at the URA for this program. And we have had to, with issues that were not foreseen, we've had to tap into some emergency project funds to resolve them. These are things that were very, very impossible to guess at the time that the contractor scope, the work scope, and the contractor estimates were being developed. So the importance of having some, administrative discretion over emergency project funds for what lies beneath is really, really critical. So we do hope, that can continue. And lastly, a diagnostics budget is something else that, we think would be valuable to be considered. This could be something like diagnostics on a sewer line, because, another situation that we faced on a project on Lillian Street in Knoxville was that there was a presumed blockage in the pipe, that it wasn't cambered or anything, but it turned out that the whole section of the pipe had to be replaced. So, things like that add cost and, and then kind of come to an impasse where everyone's wondering if there's a workaround, what to do. But diagnostic budgets would go a long way, to foresee them. So with that, any other questions? In the last slide here. Yeah, questions, thoughts, comments, feedback? Something, jokes? Nothing?
Thank you for those recommendations. Those are something I think we'll discuss at a later date. Oh, Joanna, you have a question, comment?
Yes, I was wondering about the timing for the approvals. Have you seen it improve? Also, I was unclear whether you were able to help all 79 people that you helped apply for HOF, or if you're still dealing with, denials and trying to get folks qualified, and or just waiting on the wait list.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. So to answer your second question first, there is still a very long, wait list of people. And the URA staff would know more than me exactly, but I believe it's about a year, and new applications aren't being accepted currently. So, the demand for this program far out exceeds, the amount of funding and capacity available to do it. And then your second question about timeline for closings, Mohawk, Jeff, I don't know if you guys have any insight into that, but I mean, I'm assuming we're comparing, roughly now to this time last year, just from the time a project is approved to the time that it can get underway. Mohawk.
I was even
Okay.
thinking like 2019 when you started, to present. I'm assuming that's increased dramatically.
Yeah, Joanna, to answer your first question, the timeline has definitely improved. I mean, out of my experience, the closing timelines has definitely improved from 2019-20 to now. But roughly, the closing, I think it takes from the time from the initial walkthrough to the final approval, it takes almost 6 weeks at this point.
And from the time of application.
I think it's, as Aaron said, it's close to 1 year. Waiting.
Thank you.
Happy New Year, Aaron. Got a question to help us get some perspective on the diagnostics part of the question. Roughly what's a reasonable amount to set aside or to assume would cover those diagnostics?
Dr. Bay, thanks for the question. I'm going to punt this one to Mohawk.
Yes. That's a good question, Dr. Bay. I would say, I think not much, but around $1,000 cap, I think that should do. Because plumbing, I mean, I would say the MEP problems, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, those are the things which really needs a diagnostic. And the diagnostic part are not very expensive and can be tapped out, can be tapped in within $1,000 budget, I think.
And just to clarify, though, not all projects need it,
Yes.
So I think it would be more of a discretionary administrative resource than it would, kind of a defined piece of every project.
Right. I mean, that can be determined in the first walkthrough when we take these projects.
All right, that's helpful for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question as well. I know every project is different to some degree, but on average, how long is it taken to complete the project once it's started?
Our timelines has been very swift with the projects, and I would say we generally, if I look back on almost 25 projects that we closed, so 8 to 10 weeks is a good timeline for a project, and we do multiple projects simultaneously.
I've got a question. If you had enough money, how much money would you be able to go through? Like, what do you have capacity for number of homeowners that you could help if the funding were available?
So, Aaron, do you want to take it, or should I just? Okay.
Go ahead.
So, we handle, almost 4 projects parallelly at this point, but we can definitely go up till 6 or 7. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Any others?
Yes, actually, one more. Have you been successful with being able to find some minority contractors to do some of your work?
Yes. Whenever we are expanding our contractors database, that's our priority. That's our intent. We and over I would say last 1.5 years, we have definitely found, we were able to find some good minority contractors. And on the same line, I mean, what we at Hilltop we try to do, we try to develop these contractors as well. So as Aaron mentioned earlier, we have ESG programs, that the Emergency Stabilization Grant, and which are smaller projects than the HAP. So we start these contractors with these smaller projects, and once they develop to the capacity of a HAP or even the bigger projects, then we start using them on our HAP projects. So short answer to your question, yes, we have been successful in finding the minority workforce for these projects.
Yeah, Derek, I mean, we'd have to check all the exact numbers at this point, but I mean, last we checked, it was over 50%. And then we do try to prioritize contractors who are from our service area as well.
Okay, thank you.
If you'd be curious, by the way, we could probably break that down and figure it out. I'd like to actually internally anyhow. So these are some of those end of year things that you want to reconcile. All right. Any other questions? No.
All right. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much for that presentation. As you can see, you've given us some things to chew on and think through a little bit more deeply. And thank you for your on the ground view of how HAP is performing. It's very informative for us. So with that concluded, we will move on to the administrative items of the advisory board. I believe we have a committee update from our communications and community outreach committee. Knowledge, will you be making that presentation, or do you have someone else from your committee who would be presenting that? Does anybody from that committee who would anybody from that committee like to give a report out as to where things are? I know you met just either yesterday or you met this week, you met this year. So if anybody would like to report out on your status thus far.
I can if nobody else can.
Thank you.
Sure. We just met yesterday and we talked a lot about ways to promote HOF. We want to make sure that one, people know about it so they can access programs, and two, there's broad support for the programs and the funding, and people understand what it is and what it does. So we talked about working with URA staff around bolstering the HOF within their existing marketing strategies, social media, e-newsletters, etc. And we also talked about a strategy that would highlight stories of people that have benefited from the HOF in local newspapers as well as regional. So we were going to identify some news outlets and identify HOF neighborhoods to identify people impacted that may be interested in sharing their stories. So we'll be providing that opportunity to this board. If people know of folks that would be good to highlight and that would be interested in sharing their stories, let us know. I was going to mention that to Aaron before he left as well. I'm sure there's a lot of folks that might be good for something like this. We could get an article, for example, in the South Pittsburgh Reporter. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, and we'll be looking to have the URA staff at our next meeting, which will be in a couple of weeks.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I don't believe there were meetings of the RFP task force or the Fair Housing Committee. Please correct me if I'm wrong in that understanding. But with that in mind, we can move on to the URA staff report on programmatic expenditures and updates.
Thanks, Kelly. So I'll go ahead and take this one. So we have some new graphics on the screen here for a new year. This slide is typically our HOF expenditures and impact slide that shows funds that we've committed and closed throughout 2018 to 2021. So presently, so the green shows funds that have been closed or committed, or essentially funds that have been expended. And then the light blue are funds that are not yet committed. So for example, rental gap, you'll see we've committed about 60% of our funding, whereas for homeowner assistance, we're pretty much fully committed, especially once we take into account, like Aaron said, our wait list is over 130 people right now, and it's over a year long. That is essentially fully committed at this point until we receive the 2022 funding from the city. So this is just a new way to interpret our figures and help visualize where we're at with spending our funding. This also shows a breakdown of the dollars committed by AMI. So this is essentially the chart that you've seen every month, but just in a graph form. The dark blue represents AMI households at 30% AMI or below. Light blue represents households at 50% AMI or below. Green represents households at 80% AMI or below, and then yellow for households at 115% AMI or below. So for example, rental gap, you'll see that we are committing about 55% of our funding to households at 30% AMI or below. Whereas if you compare that to down payment and closing cost assistance, you'll see that most of our funding is going towards households at 80% AMI or below. So this graph just helps us better visualize our spending and where our AMI allocations are going, and just to make sure that we're meeting our legislation targets. And this is also a similar graph, but it breaks down households by AMI. So similarly, dark blue.
Your mom gave me this picture, exclamation point.
I'm sorry, Adrienne?
I am so sorry, Vathina. Something is playing here in my office.
Oh, no worries. So 50% AMI or below is light blue, 80% AMI or below is green, and then 115% AMI is yellow. So these are the same figures that you see every month, but just with a new visualization. And hopefully this will help the advisory board and the public better understand where our money is going and who it's helping. So I would love feedback from the advisory board on the way we're representing this data. Since this is a new year, now would be a great time to implement some changes. If you have any feedback for me or any recommendations on ways that we can better represent our data, or if you'd like to see different information on the screen, I am welcome to any feedback or comments the advisory board may have.
Athena, I think this is incredibly helpful. That's why I had unmuted myself. I apologize. You got that input. I think that this really helps me visualize a lot more clearly. I think it also highlights, talking about waiting lists for programs, really thinking through that question of demand, thinking through how we prioritize based on that is really powerful and sets a great stage for our work going forward this year.
Thank you, Adrian.
I agree. I do have a question. The slide before seemed to have the lines seem to be thicker and easier to read. And then you go to the next one, they kind of get pretty skinny. If they could, be consistent, I think the thicker ones it's easier to read.
Yes, absolutely.
Sure.
Vatina, I think this is great also. And I wonder if we want to show something related to job creation. I know our focus, this is great for all the households that we're helping, but we're also creating jobs, like all of the contractors that are working on the rental gap and the homeowner stuff. And people, I think that's an impact of the HOF that people aren't thinking about as much, but is really significant. So I think it would be great if we could have some kind of indicator of that.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And we can definitely create that data and show it alongside households helped and units created as well.
Yeah, I say that knowing really well how hard it is to track, because I'm always trying to track it myself, but I think it's worth trying.
Absolutely.
Bettina, can you share those slides with the
Yes.
advisory board? Thank you.
Awesome. So if there are no further questions or comments, and again, if you do think of anything later on, feel free to email me your suggestions or comments, and we can definitely incorporate that into the February advisory board presentation. So I will actually turn it over to Evan to make the announcements before adjournment.
Thanks, Bettina. Oh,
Sorry,
go ahead, Mark.
One question. What about the geographic distribution, which is the other, we've got these income strata, but we also have the by the legislation, it needs to be, fairly distributed through all 9 council districts.
Yeah, so when I create the map and put all programs on the map, it's very hard to have that create meaningful insights as all of our programs are equally distributed. So I can certainly include that just so that we have that visual representation that our projects are hitting all 9 council districts. But if there's a more meaningful way we can show geographic representation across the city, I'm more than willing to change up that graphic. Typically, we break it down by consumer programs and then our development programs onto 2 different maps, but perhaps it might be better if I do individual maps for each program. That might be more meaningful. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I think it probably individual programs, because it'll just be too much of a jumble. Or maybe it's listed by neighborhood or, or by council district, just to show the number by program might be another way to do it. I think the map's always helpful, but also the numbers would be important by council district.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say that to Mark's point, it might be helpful if it was a list versus just the graphic. It might be easier to read, like if it was just council district and broken out in the list.
If we could possibly have both, because I think geographically, sometimes within council districts, there's a lot of range in terms of demographics and income levels, sometimes within a single council district. So that might be helpful if we could, if we could do both. I'm sorry to make more work. And also something that I was thinking about when we were looking at this chart, there are a few items, and we haven't fully discussed how to implement some of the recommendations from the RFP working group that I would like to see perhaps visualized once we get those implemented into something into our reports. But of course, we haven't implemented those for you to have the data to show. But once we do, hopefully be able to have some of those reported out. Because in terms of, job creation, one of them was minority contractors or subcontractors that are employed, some things like that. So perhaps we can, in a future meeting, discuss what we'd like to do with those recommendations that came out from the RFP committee so that we can collect the information to be able to look at some of those things that we did decide that we cared about.
Yeah, certainly.
So
And yeah, also picking up on this marketing and outreach discussion, one of the things that's going to be helpful, I think, as we do outreach to specific communities is having that granular information. So whether it's by council district or income level or both, I think the more specific we can make it to specific populations, the better we'll have, the better chance we'll have of hitting our targets and outreach.
And I would just say, I also like the maps. I'm not sure about having a separate map for each. I mean, that's, looking at 7 different maps, maybe grouping them, where it's like maybe rental gap and for sale together, maybe homeowner assistance and down payment is another, and then the rest of them on a third, something along those lines. The one concern I have about just listening relative to council districts, not everyone really knows what communities that really entails. People more identify with names of neighborhoods. So I think the maps can accomplish that, but I guess that's my concern about just kind of doing it based on council district alone.
I think we may not need a report, every meeting on the council district, but it'd be nice to have like an annual report by council district that each council person could get and put on their own website, or, information that they have about how the program's working.
Agreed.
any other questions, comments on this slide? I like the new visualization, Tina, by the way. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, so this is an announcement that was shown at the December meeting, but there are a couple of updates. So the first one on the left side is the rental gap program RFP that was released back at the end of November, funded primarily by the Housing Opportunity Fund 2021 rental gap allocation. That RFP is still out and rolling, and I would anticipate that the advisory board will start to see some applications come through in the next couple of months here. And again, that is for non-9% low-income housing tax credit projects that will be funded through that RFP. And then on the right side of this screen, we've got the 9% low-income housing tax credit pre-application that the URA annually posts. And the update here is that it was originally, the deadline was early January, this week, but we've decided to extend that to February 21st. That's a Monday. So for anyone who may be informed community groups or development teams about this pre-application, just please relay to them that there's been an extension on that deadline. And just 2 other announcements here. The first, that the 2022 Housing Opportunity Fund annual allocation plan was approved by City Council. So with the change in administration, general timing of that. We expect to have that funding actually transferred over to the trustee that houses the Housing Opportunity Fund money sometime in the spring of 2022 here. And then second announcement here that the next advisory board meeting is Thursday, February 3rd at 9 a.m. And that will be on Zoom as they have been for the last 20 or so months. So those are the only announcements I've got right now for you. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions, concerns, or announcements, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
And
We don't.
oh, you don't need a second. I just wanted to second it.
Okay, I was gonna say I don't need a second, but I will accept it. So thank you everyone for your time this morning. Thank you for Housing Partnership and Hilltop Alliance for your wonderful and informative presentations. And we will see everyone here right back on Zoom on February 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you.